Let's begin with the foundations. Today we discuss the XZ Utils backdoor, designated CVE 2024-3094. This is another lecture. I am Alexei. I teach and research in the mathematical and computing sciences. And in this context, I serve as your somewhat pedantic guide through the supply chain labyrinth.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I work with the professor and help think through the messy parts students ask about. So today I will ask the naive questions on purpose.
To frame our discussion, in simpler terms, XZ Utils is the zip and unzip of the Linux world. It compresses and decompresses files and is ubiquitous. The backdoor we are examining was malicious code deliberately introduced so that a remote attacker holding a very specific cryptographic key could secretly execute commands on a machine. In other words, it was a hidden remote control, carefully concealed inside a very ordinary toolbox.
So basically, if your Linux system used the tainted version of this compression tool, someone with the right key could, log in or run code without permission. Is that fair?
Clearly, and more technically, it's crucial to understand that OpenSSH does not normally interact with XZ Utils. The linkage emerged because some distributions applied a systemd-related patch that connected SSHD to liblizma, a component of XZ. The attacker exploited this integration path. Activation was further gated by a specific ED448 private key. Without that exact key, the malicious path lay dormant. Mathematically, this is an elegant form of gating. Extremely low noise, high precision, minimal accidental triggering.
I think the next thing we should talk about is why this matters so much. Beyond the technical elegance, what was at stake?
Remote code execution implies potential administrator-level control of affected systems. In practice, that can mean data exfiltration, lateral movement, and full compromise. The CVE carried a CVSS score of 10.0, which is the maximum. Experts, including Alex Stamos, argued that had it propagated into stable channels, it could have served as a master key across vast numbers of SSH-enabled systems. In this context, the stakes were not just high, they were systemic.
And historically, people missed it because it was so woven into the build process and distribution patches, right?
Indeed. The complexity and obfuscation were formidable. The crucial point is that the malicious build logic existed in the release tarballs rather than in the Git repository files as reviewers saw them. Many of us assume parity between a tagged commit and its published tarball. That assumption was exploited. Additionally, the execution path hinged on packaging choices, such as the systemd linkage. Thus, ordinary code review and typical testing often saw nothing suspicious.
Let's consider this. XZ Utils is everywhere, but the damaged versions were not widely in production, right? Can we go through the basic timeline?
Let's start with the history. In 2021, a user identifying as Jiatan began a sustained social engineering campaign, including the use of sock puppet accounts such as Jigar Kumar, Krigorin4545, and Miso Eater 91. Over time, pressure and persistence led to maintainer-level permissions. In February 2024, versions 5.6.0 and 5.6.1 were released with malicious logic placed in tarball-only build scripts. The Git view looked comparatively benign, while the tarballs extracted concealed components during builds on targeted environments. The trigger conditions were carefully chosen, commonly x86_64 with glibc and GCC, and when built by DPKG or RPM. This choice aligned with mainstream distribution build farms and reduced accidental exposure.
And the discovery moment. That was Andres Freund, right? He noticed performance weirdness.
Precisely. In March 2024, while investigating an SSH performance regression in a Debian development build, Andres Freund observed high CPU usage and valgrind errors. Curiosity led to a report to Debian and then to the OpenWall project, and vendors were rapidly notified. The issue was assigned CVE 2024-3094 with a maximum severity score. Fortunately, at the time of discovery, the compromised versions were mostly in development branches and had not propagated widely into production, a fact that substantially limited immediate damage.
So yeah, moving on. What happened next in terms of response?
CISA advised rollbacks to uncompromised versions, and vendors acted quickly. Red Hat, SUSE, and Debian reverted affected packages. GitHub temporarily disabled repo mirrors to halt inadvertent spread. Canonical delayed the Ubuntu 24.04 LTS beta by 1 week and rebuilt all packages to assure integrity. In May 2024, Lassie Collin, the longtime maintainer, regained GitHub access, removed all forwarding to Giatan, and released version 5.6.2, which excised the malicious elements. He also documented the code evolution that enabled the exploit. In conclusion, a rapid and coordinated response constrained a potentially catastrophic outcome. Before we get to the complexities, a brief personal note. Many years ago, I made something of a ritual of verifying that a release tarball could be reproduced from a signed Git tag. The first time I failed that test, it turned out to be a harmless documentation artifact, but it permanently changed my habits. We infer from this case that the seemingly boring step of comparing tarballs to source history is in fact where much of the drama hides. This logically leads us to three larger questions. Priyanka, would you set the agenda with the first?
I've been wondering, historically, how did something so consequential remain undetected for so long? And what does that say about our assumptions in open source projects?
Speaking of history, the path to undetected compromise combines social engineering with technical sleight of hand. The attacker invested years to obtain trust and permissions, using sock puppet accounts to apply pressure on governance. Once trust was secured, the divergence between Git and tarballs created a shadow channel for malicious steps. The trigger was further constrained to mainstream build systems, meaning many developers compiling on atypical machines would never activate it. Finally, the ED448 key requirement made incidental activation vanishingly unlikely. In simpler terms, reviewers looked in the right place, but the attack played on a different board.
From a different angle. What made detection by automated tests so hard? Why didn't CI pipelines flag this earlier?
To elaborate, continuous integration often builds from Git, not from release tarballs fetched by downstream packagers. Where tarballs are tested, the environment may not match the attacker's trigger matrix. Even if it did, activation still required the attacker's private ED448 key, which CI does not and should not possess. Furthermore, OpenSSH was only connected to XZ via a distribution-specific systemd linkage. Many upstream tests would never traverse that path. Think of chess. If you evaluate only the main line after 1e4 and ignore unusual transpositions, a prepared adversary will steer the game into a sideline where your heuristics do not apply. On to our next point. Imagine the counterfactual in which Andres Freund never chased that performance regression.
What if the backdoor had not been discovered in March 2024? How far could it have gone? And what would be the real-world consequences?
Experts warned it could have become one of the most widespread and effective backdoors in software history. Given SSH's ubiquity, the attacker could have selectively accessed high-value systems with a cryptographic master key. The stealth design would have enabled long dwell time. Beyond servers, consider build farms, CI systems, and embedded devices. Unauthorized access there can cascade into other software artifacts, amplifying supply chain risk. Red Hat's analysis concluded full remote access was attainable once triggered. The blast radius, therefore, is better measured in ecosystems than in individual hosts.
Can we say that, even in that darker scenario, there were levers to pull? What mitigations might have limited the damage?
Yes, the real-world response offers a template. Immediate rollbacks to known good versions, as advised by CISA, shrink exposure. Vendors like Red Hat, SUSE, and Debian quickly reverted packages. GitHub limited distribution by disabling mirrors. Canonical postponed Ubuntu 24.04 LTS beta and rebuilt all packages, a conservative yet effective integrity measure. Strategically, reproducible builds and diffing release tarballs against signed Git tags can detect tarball-only changes, minimizing downstream patches that create non-obvious linkages, such as the OpenSSH systemd XZ path, reduces unexpected attack surface. None of these alone is a panacea, but together they form defense in depth. Let's transition to another aspect, the present-day unresolved challenges.
I'm curious about ongoing risks. What are we still not doing well enough in open source security? And what worries you most right now?
It is worth noting that the actor behind this incident remains publicly unattributed. Some analysts, such as Dave Aitel, have speculated about AP29 patterns, while others emphasize that any well-resourced actor could fit. But conclusively, we do not know. This uncertainty underscores a broader governance problem. We rely on small teams, sometimes under-resourced volunteers, to maintain critical infrastructure. The Open Source Security Foundation and the OpenJS Foundation have warned of similar social engineering attempts elsewhere, marked by friendly yet persistent pressure to grant elevated access. Theoretically, our security posture must now treat social trust decisions as part of the attack surface.
Maybe it's just me, but future prevention seems half social, half technical. What should we build, and what norms should we change? Like tomorrow morning.
Fundamentally, on the social side, slow down access elevation, require verifiable history, multi-party approval, and periodic review of maintainer privileges. Watch for unusual patterns. For example, rapid requests for responsibility by otherwise unknown contributors. On the technical side, adopt hermetic and reproducible builds. Generate release tarballs in public CI from signed tags and publish provenance. Automatically compare tarballs to the source tree. Require a two-person rule for release artifacts. Reduce, or at least inventory downstream patches that create unexpected linkages. Strengthen tamper-evident pipelines with standards like SLSA. Add tests that exercise packaging-specific code paths, and create heuristics to flag architecture-specific or build system-specific behavior that was not present historically. Finally, continue to clean up residual artifacts. Months after the incident, researchers like Binerly observed that old Debian development Docker images with the backdoor still lingered as historical artifacts. Such remnants should be isolated and clearly labeled to avoid accidental use in production.
Building on that, areas for research. Where do you think the community could make breakthroughs?
We observe promising directions. First, formalizing parity checks between repositories and release artifacts. ideally with machine-verifiable attestations. Second, anomaly detection for packaging paths that bridge components not normally connected, like OpenShish and XZ via System D. Third, risk scoring that integrates social signals such as sudden contributor influence spikes. Fourth, broader reproducible build coverage across major distributions. And fifth, continuous provenance for containers and base images so that compromised development builds do not masquerade as safe defaults. In conclusion, we must treat the socio-technical boundary as a first-class object of defense. To summarize, we examined XZ Utils, a ubiquitous Linux compression suite, and a backdoor that enabled remote code execution via an unusual OpenSH systemd linkage, activated only by a specific ED448 key. We then addressed three questions: how it stayed hidden, what might have happened had it not been found, and what remains to be done. Further study in open source security, governance, and reproducible supply chains is not optional. It is foundational. Thank you for your attention. May your tarballs always match your tags, and may your curiosity, like Andres Freund's, never ignore a suspicious spike in CPU time.
Thank you, Professor. So, I guess that kind of sums it up. Take care, everyone, and check your build scripts.